In America today, is it even possible to separate faith and politics? I traveled to Minnesota to meet a preacher who put his parish on the line to do just that.
Just join hands to the person to your right and to your left. And just join with me in your heart and in your mind.
Greg Boyd doesn't look like a fire starter.
The enemy is evil, but you are good.
But don't let appearances fool you.
There is a spiritual war going on. There is a corrupting influence of having power over others. America is not the kingdom of God.
So Greg, if I were to Google you, all it says is heretic, heretic, heresy.
That's not all it says. Come on, it can't be that bad.
You stirred up a bee's nest.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of controversy that surrounded some of my ideas on stuff.
In American society, where conservative Christianity and right-wing politics have become married, Greg Boyd wants a divorce.
I am very concerned about the extent to which what's called the kingdom of the world, the politics of the world, is being fused with our faith. In some cases, almost like a Taliban, Islamic State, where it's like we want to run a Christian society and enforce Christian laws. And my concern is that that is very damaging for the church, and it's also very damaging for society.
Boyd was raised a Catholic, lost his faith as a teenager, and then was born again at age 17. He studied religion at the Yale Divinity School and Princeton's Theological Seminary. As a professor, he taught theology for 16 years before feeling the full-time pull of the pulpit.
Be blessed.
How many people do you count in the flock here?
Judging from how full it is, whatever, on a typical weekend, it's around 4,000, I guess.
It's a lot, 4,000.
Yeah. Get your life from Jesus Christ. Get your life from Jesus Christ. All your life from Jesus Christ.
Visit Boyd's church and you'll hear a Christian message with a strong focus on personal relationships with Jesus Christ.
On the one hand, I'm a conservative Christian, and I am pro-life to the core of my being. I also believe that homosexuality misses God's ideal.
But listen to what Boyd says next.
But the Bible also says that gossip, in fact, right next to homosexuality, it mentions gossip, and it mentions greed, and it mentions gluttony. In fact, greed and gluttony are two of the most common sins held up in the ancient world as the supreme sins, and they're frequently mentioned in the Bible way more than homosexuality. I never quite understand what sin gradation scale some people go by where they decide that certain sins are worse than other kind of sins, and those are the ones we need to go against.
Be specific. In order to be pro-life, do you then have to support a candidate whose mission is to overturn Roe versus Wade?
Christiane, I don't think so. To be pro-life is not just to be concerned about the womb, it's to be concerned about life. For example, what's the relationship between poverty and abortion? And studies show that there's a direct correlation there. So maybe the best way to lessen abortion in society is to go for the candidate that you think is going to do the most for poverty. And so we need to take great care not to naively think that we can translate our particular value into a particular vote. Don't label your way of voting Christian.
Boyd's concerns over the fusion of faith and politics began building shortly after the first Gulf War, when he attended a video presentation at a 4th of July service at another church.
And there's patriotic music playing and a flag waving in the background. It showed a silhouette of 3 crosses. And 4 fighter jets came down over the crosses and split, with a flag waving in the background. And there were some people who stood up, they were ecstatic. And I started crying, because I wondered, how is it possible that we went from being a movement of people who follow the Messiah, who taught us to love our enemies, to being a movement that celebrates fighter jets, that fuses Jesus' death on the cross with killing machines. And that was, I guess, a wake-up call to me about how serious this problem is among evangelicals in America.
Those feelings were reinforced prior to the last presidential election.
I, like many, probably most evangelical pastors, was getting a certain amount of pressure to steer the flock in a certain way. Here's how you should vote. And it was, in fact, the Republican way.
How does it work? What do? They call you? Tell me how that works.
What happens is there's a lot of Christian leaders out there on Christian radio and Christian television, and people in your congregation watch them. And so a lot of the questions come from the congregation saying, aren't you going to tell us how to vote, and aren't you going to this or whatever? The enemy isn't the liberals, and the enemy isn't the conservatives. The enemy's not the abortionists. The enemy's not the gay rights activists.
Instead, Boyd did something radically different. He preached a series of 6 sermons called The Cross and the Sword.
Whenever we find politicians who start quoting Bible verses to support their agenda, we ought to be the ones saying,
Many members of his congregation disagreed and told him so.
And after the message, a lady came up, a wonderful lady, sincere, God bless her heart, but she was livid because she was saying, if you don't stop preaching liberal politics in the pulpit, I've got to leave. And I said, ma'am, I'm quoting Jesus. Jesus said this.
A lot of your flock walked out, didn't they?
Yeah, we, over the long haul, lost roughly 1,000 people in the light of this message.
But as that 1,000 left, another 1,000 took their place.
But I'll tell you, I don't regret a thing. It was a turning point for our congregation. I felt that we got a clarity about a vision of the kingdom that we're supposed to be furthering.
Greg Boyd is a different kind of pastor, a man fighting to keep partisan politics out of the church, a man who dismisses the question, how would Jesus vote?
Jesus never so much as commented on the politics of his day, and he lived in a politically hot time. I mean, it was hot, a lot of hot button issues, and Jesus consistently refused. We're to follow his example.